There's a tension I've noticed over the years in myself and in a lot of the leaders that I spend time with. It doesn't show up on a resume, it doesn't come up in meetings, and it's not something that most people talk about out loud. Most people see what you built, they see results, responsibility, and momentum. They see your role, your position, your achievements. But they can't see what's happening inside, where there's often something else at work. A pull, a drive, what actually motivates you. And that space between those two things, what's visible and what's internal, carries more tension than most people realize. That tension has been on my mind as I've been thinking about this episode. Usually on Craft to Clarity, we talk about you and I being the whiskey. We talk about the barrel as the environment that shapes us. We talk about the distillation process as the way we're refined and transformed into something that's aligned with our purpose and significance. Today, I want to step back from that process and talk about the distiller. Because there's something about the heart of a distiller that mirrors what so many leaders experience, especially those who've already built something meaningful and are now sensing a pull they can't quite explain. Most people only care about whiskey once it's out of the barrel, the bottle, the label, the taste. Few care or even think twice about the years before that moment, or what's happening inside the distiller while they wait. Distillers, like leaders, are purpose-driven people. They're not chasing speed or certainty. They're chasing something meaningful, something great, something worth the time it takes to create something that will outlive them. From the beginning, distillers know that waiting is unavoidable. And that's the one part of the process that really can't be rushed. The barrel, the time, the discipline, the patience. It's all an act of trust. Trust that something significant is forming long before anyone else will ever see it. And at the heart of both the distiller and the leader is the same tension. A call to purpose that doesn't show up in the job description. A drive that goes beyond position. A pull between what others see and what's actually shaping you. And that tension is worth paying attention to. There's something we miss when we only focus on what a distiller produces and not who they are. Before the bottle, before the label, before the whiskey is ever tasted. A distiller is not the process. A distiller is the person who chooses to engage it. Distilling is active work. It's about removal, discernment, knowing what doesn't belong, and having the courage to take it out. That alone tells you something about the heart of a distiller. At their core, distillers are oriented towards purpose. Not ambition, not efficiency, purpose. They're drawn to creating something that will stand on its own, something that carries the weight beyond the moment it's consumed. And they understand something that most people don't. Significance doesn't happen by accident. It has to be crafted. That means making decisions that others will never see, choosing restraint when excess is easier, protecting standards when shortcuts are available. Distillers don't just let the process happen, they steward it. They're constantly discerning what needs to remain and what needs to be removed, not just from the product, but from themselves as well. At the heart of a distiller is obedience. Obedience to what they believe is the right thing to do. Obedience to the process, the science, and the instinct earned through experience, even when they can't fully explain it. They don't always have language for why a decision matters. They don't always know how it will be received. But they trust their judgment. They trust a calling, and they act accordingly. That obedience isn't protected from pressure. Distillers are constantly pushed to move faster, to release more, to meet demand, to satisfy expectations from the market or the organization or the public, most of whom will never see or understand the process. The pressure almost always points in one direction: speed. And choosing restraint in the face of that pressure is where the tension can develop. That obedience requires conviction. A distiller has to live with tension, holding competing pressures like quality and time, tradition and innovation, expectations and restraint, and still choose what aligns with the standard they're protecting. Over time, that posture shapes the distiller. They become more intentional, more discerning, less reactive. There's also a humility woven into the heart of a distiller. They know the bottle won't carry their name. They know the brand will continue after they're gone. They know their role is to contribute something worthy, not to be remembered. Which is why they're willing to commit fully to the work in front of them, even when that work is only one part of a much larger story. Because at the heart of the distiller is this belief: significance isn't rushed or stumbled into. It's formed with intention. And that kind of heart tends to resonate deeply with people who are carrying more than their role can explain. So the other night, I was flipping through the channels and I landed on the movie Field of Dreams. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, and every time I come across it, I stop and I watch it to the end. For anyone who hasn't seen it or haven't watched it in a long time, here's the heart of the movie. The movie follows Ray Kinsella, played by Kevin Costner. He's a farmer in Iowa. That's his job. That's how he makes a living. That's what his life looks like to most people. But early on, we learn that being a farmer isn't really him. It's where he is, it's not who he is. So one day, while walking through his cornfield, Ray hears a voice. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't give him a plan. It just calls him to do something that makes no sense. And at first, Ray resists it. He questions it. He tries to ignore it, hoping it'll just go away. Because following it would mean uncertainty, risk, and looking foolish. And that's uncomfortable. But the voice doesn't stop. Eventually, Ray stops resisting and starts listening. And that decision creates problems for Ray. He plows under a healthy cornfield, his livelihood, to build a baseball field that no one asked for and no one understands. The people around him push back. They want explanations that he can't give. They see irresponsibility where he feels obedience. And instead of clarity, the voice leads him further. More prompts, more instructions, a journey that doesn't seem connected at first until it slowly begins to make sense. What Ray discovers along the way is that this field isn't the point. Listening to the voice is. Through that obedience, something in Ray comes together. Old wounds are addressed. Unfinished relationships resurface. And parts of his story that were never resolved find completion. By the end of the movie, it's clear that the voice wasn't leading Ray towards a construction project. It was leading him towards alignment. And that alignment didn't just affect him. It created ripple effects for everyone drawn into the story. And that's why Field of Dreams isn't really a movie about baseball. It's a story about what happens when someone finally stops resisting a call they don't fully understand, but they choose to follow it anyway. This is where the stories stop feeling separate. When you look at the heart of the distiller and the journey that Ray is on, the same tension shows up in both places. In each case, there's a difference between the setting and the calling. Ray is a farmer, and the distiller works inside of a rickhouse. Those roles matter. They carry responsibility, and they demand faithfulness. But they aren't the full story. In whiskey, the barrel plays a specific role. It applies pressure. It shapes the spirit. It reveals what's there and removes what doesn't belong. The whiskey is meant to be shaped and defined there, but not to stay there. And in the same way, the roles we occupy often function like the barrel. They shape us. They stretch us. They expose strengths and limits. But they're not meant to define the whole of who we are. And that's where that tension shows up. That tension between what we built, past tense, and what we're built for, future tense. The present is where we're living, where we're showing up, leading, carrying weight, doing what the role requires of us. At the same time, pressure is never far away. Pressure to meet expectations, pressure to deliver significance for the organization, to be valuable, indispensable, even defining, rather than significant in a way that's true to who you are. Pressure to let the role decide what matters most. But if you've ever left an organization, you know they move on when you leave. Roles change. Titles get filled by someone else. That doesn't diminish the work that you're doing. It just reveals the work was never meant to carry all of your meaning. This episode isn't about process. It's about the heart of doing the work. For the distiller, the steward, the creator, and it's the heart of both the distiller and the leader. Is this reality? Being true matters more than being right. When a calling shows up, it rarely arrives with clarity or certainty. It arrives as a pull, a restlessness, a tension that refuses to be ignored. Ray didn't understand the voice when he first heard it. He didn't know where it would lead. He only knew that he couldn't pretend it wasn't there. The distiller doesn't always have proof either. They have instinct, experience, a standard they've learned to trust. And for many leaders, the work you're doing right now may not be the destination, but it isn't accidental. It's shaping you, refining you, preparing you. No season is ever wasted, unless you stay in a season that you're no longer meant to stay in. So the question isn't whether you're being faithful where you are. The question is whether you're listening for what's trying to emerge. Because sometimes the voice that creates the tension isn't calling you away from responsibility. It's calling you forward into alignment with who you're becoming. So, what does that voice sound like today? Well, for most leaders, it isn't an audible voice. It doesn't announce itself like the voice from a cornfield. And it doesn't always show up with a plan. It shows up as a thought that you can't quite shake. A question that keeps resurfacing. A sense that while the work you're doing matters, it doesn't fully explain why you feel the way you do. Sometimes it sounds like there's more here than this role can hold. What I'm building is important, but it's not the whole story. I don't know what's next. I just know that this isn't the end. It can feel inconvenient, ill-timed, hard to explain to anyone else. And that's what makes it so easy to dismiss, because the voice rarely asks for something practical. It asks for attention. Ray heard it in a cornfield. The distiller senses it in the moments of restraint, choosing not to rush, not to cut corners, not to betray a standard. Leaders hear it in quieter ways. In moments when success is happening but fulfillment feels incomplete, or when the organization wants significance from you, but something deeper is asking significance of you. The voice rarely asks for immediate action, but it doesn't go away either. It waits. And whether we listen to it or not, often determines whether the tension we feel becomes formation or frustration. So if you've ever gone to a whiskey tasting, then you know about tasting notes. They aren't about telling someone what to taste. They're about slowing down long enough to notice what's already there. They help give language to subtle things. They help you name what you're experiencing without rushing to judge it or explain it away. And in the same way, these tasting notes aren't conclusions. They're just reflections, observations worth sitting with. So as we close, here are a few tasting notes from what we talked about today. Not to resolve any tension, but just to help you notice what might already be forming in you. First, the voice doesn't come to explain your future. It comes to reveal what's already been forming inside of you. Like the whiskey in the barrel, clarity often arrives after the distillation. Second, pressure will always try to define significance for you. The role, the organization, the expectations. But significance isn't assigned by what needs you. It's shaped by what you are faithful to steward. And third, the tension you feel isn't a sign that something is broken. It's often the signal that something is being distilled. What you've built matters. And what you're built for, well, that's still unfolding. If you've seen Field of Dreams, it might be worth watching again. Not as a story about chasing a crazy dream, but as a story about paying attention to what keeps calling you. The plot isn't about baseball. It's about listening to what's hinting at your purpose and allowing that obedience to slowly bring things into alignment. And if you haven't seen it, you might not need to, because the real question isn't about Ray Kinsella. It's about what you're hearing and whether you're willing to listen long enough to understand what has been shaping in you. And in the end, remember, clarity isn't found. It's crafted. Thanks for listening to Crafted Clarity. If you're a leader wrestling with the tension between success and significance, or you're trying to align your work with a deeper calling, I'd love to connect with you. If your organization is facing questions about strategy, whether it's alignment, ROI, or building confidence in your team, this is the work we do every day at iBrand. And if you walk this journey yourself, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, I'd love to hear your story and maybe even share it here on the podcast. You can find me at craftedclarity.net.